Hi, I'm Tomas,
And I'm Kaye.
and today we'll orient you to the research process. Today's plan is to look at three things: the research process, genre of writing, and using Monash library resources. Since we're talking about research, it might be good to define what research is. This is the definition from Macquarie Dictionary. Research is a diligent and systematic inquiry or investigation into a subject in order to discover facts or principles. For instance, research in nuclear physics. So what we have here is, first of all, diligence, but also systematic nature of scientific process. And in this sense, it's very good to remind ourselves that the method through which science functions, the scientific method, is very much an organized, step-by-step method. It is a method of research in which the steps are identification of a problem, collection of relevant data, formulation of a hypothesis on the basis of this data, and finally empirical testing of the hypothesis to prove its validity. And the burden of evidence is going to be on knowledge based on observable, measurable, communicable data. So what we have here is essentially a procedure that starts with formulating a question, collecting data based on empirical evidence, formulating questions, further research, and testing that whether the hypothesis holds. This may seem like the most obvious way of going around gathering evidence and coming to a conclusion, but it wasn't always the same. This example is from the work of Alexander Neckham, who was a thinker, theologian, and natural scientist from what we call the Middle Ages. And I'll just read this. But it should be known that the word knowledge is understood differently in the writings of philosophers and differently in sacred scripture. According to the usage of philosophers, knowledge originates in the senses and imprints the properties of perceptible things onto the soul. For sense, just like a winnowing fork, ignites the fire of reason, which then forms knowledge by boiling away airs. In this way, though, inaccuracies get mixed in. According to the use of theologians, however, knowledge is not created by the means of the soul or the senses, but by infusion of grace. From the point of view of philosophers, therefore, knowledge is designated by the word given. From the point of view of theologians, by the word gift. Now, what Neckham is doing here is making a distinction between knowledge as perceived by the senses and knowledge as infused by religion or transcendental knowledge. To him, sense-based knowledge is interesting, but ultimately limited. The big questions, why are we here, what is the purpose of life, cannot be answered by mere observation. What he points out is a divide present to this day between empirical knowledge, this is where the scientific method falls, and other kinds of knowing. Since Neckham's day, the scientific method has been developed and refined, and he would probably change his mind about the unreliability of the senses. But at the same time, he does remind us that the scientific method is only as good as the questions it asks and the ways hypotheses are defined, tested, and placed into context. Many things that cannot be measured empirically will most likely not be considered through scientific observation. When we talk about progress from Neckham's time to ours, we should also remember that the progress of scientific knowledge is not automatic, nor is it a simple building of evidence through centuries. As the American scholar Thomas Kuhn has shown, every large community that shares scientific knowledge creates its own way of understanding and approaching problems. This understanding has its own language, defined questions, and motivations. This is what he calls a paradigm. Neckham's paradigm was the investigation of nature through religious lenses. In the Renaissance, prior to the invention of the microscope, scientists explored diseases through an analysis of smells and humidity, which they thought caused disease. Today's paradigm is quite different, and we are trained in the language and methods of that paradigm. What Kuhn has shown is that different paradigms do not just build on one another, but offer a profoundly new way of looking at the world. When DNA was identified, most older ways of studying cell division were abandoned, and a new way of studying cells was adopted. Kuhn calls this change a paradigm shift because it implies an entirely new way of finding, processing, and interpreting evidence. Mastering a new paradigm means mastering a whole new worldview. So how does a paradigm and creating scientific knowledge through paradigm work? Here's a graph displaying the stages of the research process. It starts with embarking on inquiry. This is where you refine your question and decide what is worth investigating. The kinds of questions you ask will reflect what other scientists are researching, the prevailing paradigm. The second step is finding information and understanding the structure of the literature. This is where the genre of literature review belongs, the kind of writing that summarizes current trends, achievements, and gaps. But any research project or writing about research will also need to be informed by existing literature. The third step is critical analysis and evaluation of the information and data. This is also where you will need to think about managing your information and data. The next step is synthesis, arriving at a conclusion, better understanding, overview, or answer to a research question. Because you will present your observation, communication skills will be essential, as will be your skills of time and project management. Along the sides of the diagram are two arrows indicating two different ways of approaching inquiry. On the right side is deduction, from Latin ducere, to lead, and de, away from. Deductive thinking means starting from existing knowledge or premises and formulating other questions or knowledge based on them. When you formulate your research question, you engage in deductive thinking. You begin with existing knowledge and create an approach to find more of it. On the left side is induction, from Latin ducere, lead, and into. Inductive thinking means gathering together individual pieces of observation or evidence and drawing a conclusion based on them. You engage in inductive thinking when you interpret your results and formulate a single answer or conclusion. An equivalent set of terms in relation to dealing with research articles and your own writing are analysis and synthesis. When you analyze an article, you start from something that is given and deduce observation based on that source. When you write up your own paper and gather together evidence or observations, in a synthesis, you are engaging in inductive thinking. Now that we have a sense of what the research process entails, let us look at the way it is communicated, the structure of scientific literature. You can also think about it as the flow of scientific information, from idea to published paper. And now we'll hand over to Kaye.
Thanks, Thomas. So it's Kaye here. I'm the subject librarian, and I just want to talk about the flow of scientific information. When a researcher gets an idea, observes a pattern, something's bothering them, they'll decide to do some research. And as they work through their experiments or their data collection, the process of research, they'll discuss their findings, their experiences with their colleagues informally, and then they will present traditionally, as scholarly communication has gone for many years, will present at a conference. And then they will publish their findings in a journal article. That's the primary literature. That's where the researcher is reporting directly their findings. Now, from that, the primary literature could then get synthesized, where another researcher will decide to do a review on a topic, address a question, and gather the evidence, gather the information, the primary studies that address that question, appraise them, analyse the studies, synthesise them into a review article. That's secondary literature. Or an author could write a book where they also gather the literature, analyse it, synthesise it into a book on a topic. So moving away from direct reporting from the author or the researcher, the primary literature. So bias can be introduced, of course, but it's generally distilled in some way, the secondary literature. Then we get to the tertiary literature, where those research findings eventually end up as basic knowledge reported in handbooks, encyclopedias, textbooks, dictionaries. Now, when we learn about a topic, as we do every day, learn something new, we generally start at the tertiary literature level, needing to define terms. We go to a dictionary or an encyclopedia. We read a textbook section to get a basic understanding of a topic. And then we can move higher up in that hierarchy of literature, read a review article, read a book, and then get into the primary literature, the actual original studies, which are going to use more specific, more technical language, so not as accessible as the tertiary and secondary literature. I want to also mention the grey literature, which sits there within the primary literature. Grey literature is that which is not black or white. So also another way of explaining it is that it's literature which is not published through the usual channels, not through journals, not through books. They consist of conference papers, proceedings, reports, preprints, websites. So they're not necessarily produced for the purpose of research. It could be commissioned reports for the government, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare reports, the Australian Bureau of Statistics reports, the World Health Organisation. They're all examples of grey literature. On our medicine library tab, on our medicine library guide rather, if you Google Monash Medicine Library Guide, you'll find the subject guide for medicine where we gather together the key resources for you. And there is a tab on grey literature, and it gives you a really good overview of what it is and how to find them. Okay, so I'll pass back to Thomas now so he can address the next slide, which is about genres of writing.
Thanks, Kaye. Now that we know how literature flows, let us have a brief look at the different types of communicating scientific knowledge and their characteristics. We can use the word genre, which refers to a type or class of expression that shares common characteristics. When it comes to grey literature, which may or may not be peer-reviewed, perhaps the most common example is the conference poster and conference presentation. Both are relatively brief ways of communicating the highlights of the findings of a project. Conference poster will be concise, but visually engaging outline of a project. It will usually contain all 5 parts of a scientific article: background, aims, methods, results, and conclusion, with the aim of clearly and briefly communicating the significance, contribution, and fascinating aspects of the project. This is why posters have graphs and tables and are less wordy than articles. A conference presentation is an equivalent of a poster, except it consists of the author delivering a talk or slides highlighting major findings. Because of time limitations, usually around 20 to 30 minutes, a conference presentation needs to be well organized and only highlight information that can be explained within the time limit. The genre of writing you're most likely to read and be familiar with is a peer-reviewed scientific article. The article is considered primary source because most articles report the results of original research. They are the gold standard of scientific production within the existing paradigm. If you want to read about up-to-date research, you will consult research articles. Gatekeeping in the primary literature is done through the peer review process. Experts who collaborate with journals provide feedback to submitted papers and ensure that only papers that satisfy journal standards are published. The scientific article has a relatively predictable format. It will usually contain an abstract, and the text itself will be divided into sections: introduction and aims, methods, results, and discussion or conclusion. Another primary source you may read is conference proceedings. These are revised conference presentations which have gone through the peer review process and provide an expanded version of oral presentations done at conferences. They tend to be shorter than research articles and often reflect very recent research. Secondary literature is literature that digests, synthesizes, or comments on recent research findings. The major genre here are the literature review, which provides a thorough synthesis of recent trends, findings, and gaps relevant to a specific research area; the review article, which provides an analytical commentary on a specific article or specific research finding; and an opinion piece, which provides a brief observation on an article or recent development.
No matter what genre of writing you use, what source of information you use, this is just a reminder that we need to evaluate information critically. When we look at a list of results, when we do a search of the web or whether we search of a database like Medline, our first question will be, is this information relevant? We need to go back to our question or our topic and say, does this address our question? And if it doesn't, then we'll need to review our search. Is the author or source reliable? What are their credentials? What authority do they have to write on this topic? Does it give comprehensive coverage? And that's why we try to direct you to trusted sources, so that when you're not an expert in an area, you don't know when there are gaps. Studies of medical topics in Wikipedia, for example, have shown that while there can be a degree of accuracy in the information in Wikipedia, despite anyone being able to write for it, there are gaps. And when you're not an expert, you don't know necessarily that there are gaps. And when you're time poor, you need to be able to go to a source where you know you will get good coverage of a topic written in a concise way. Is it intended for an academic audience? So in our environment, we need to be using scholarly or academic sources generally. Is it current enough? And, in clinical practice or medicine, for example, the best available evidence for an intervention may not be a really recent paper. The research might have been done some time ago, but it's so conclusive and no further research has been required. But generally, currency is key, and it would be good if the parts of books, for example, decomposed. This is a quote from an evidence-based medicine book, I think, How to Practice or Teach It. If the actual parts of books on the shelves in libraries decomposed the parts that were out of date, so that we weren't reading that out-of-date information. Is it objective? And of course, that's going to be an issue in all sources, objectivity. Who's funding research? Does the researcher give an objective analysis and presentation of information? And then there's the CRAP test, which perhaps will help remind you of some of the key criteria for evaluating information. Today is an opportunity to also give you an orientation to library services with Monash and with the Ian Potter Library, which is here at the Alfred. So I'm based out at the Clayton campus, as is Tomas, but we visit the Alfred on a regular basis. At the Clayton campus, there are 3 libraries. The Hargrave Andrew Library, where Tomas and I are located, that's 1313 College Way. And then there's the Law Library and the Matheson Library. So the Hargrave Andrew Library is the Science, Engineering, Medicine and IT Library. The Clayton campus is just one of the campuses of Monash University. You're welcome to use any of the Monash campus libraries. If you live or work near another university, you can get a Caval card from any Monash University library and then use that to borrow from other university libraries. We also have affiliated hospital libraries, so including the Ian Potter Library here at the Alfred campus. You can access the library remotely, our resources and services, via the My Monash portal. There's a tab for the library at the top of the screen. You can see on that page a number of links. There's a link to the library class booking system. You're welcome to attend any library classes. There are classes held at the Clayton campus in the Hargrave Andrew Library. There are classes held here at the Alfred. I run classes on searching the literature, on using EndNote. In the computer lab on level 5 of the Alfred Centre, the Ian Potter Library also offer classes which you can follow up with them to find the times. There's also a link on that page, the My Monash portal, to the library homepage, which is another access point to the library's resources and services. So if you click on that link from the My Monash portal to go to the library homepage, or if you just simply Google Monash Library, you'll get to our homepage, or at any Monash University website, you'll see a link to the library on the top right-hand corner. So our library homepage, which is my preferred access point, has search. Search is our catalogue, but it's more than just a traditional library catalogue, because we provide you with access to journal articles at that article title level, not just to the journal, and then you would need to drill down to the volume and issue to find particular articles. So that's a little bit different, but quite typical with university libraries these days. So search is where you go to find a book. You can also use it to find a journal article on a topic, although I think you're probably better off searching databases directly. But certainly if you need to find an article to get the full text, you can simply copy and paste the article title into search and you will retrieve it, hopefully. We obviously don't own everything, and I'll talk about how you can get access to articles that we don't own shortly. From underneath that search box that's highlighted in the centre of the page, you can see there's a link to our databases A to Z. And it's useful to use that to get to the databases. Just a little more about searching search. It's a good idea to always sign in. There's help on the right-hand side for further tips. You can use keywords to find information about a topic, or you can search using, a book title or an author's name, or, as I said before, an article title. If you are doing a search on a topic using some keywords, make sure you use the facets to refine your results. Or if you're looking for a book that has a fairly generic name, again, make sure you limit your search to books to make sure you're getting the answers more quickly. If you sign in, you will also get the option to request books that are held at other campuses and have them delivered to you. I'll talk more about that shortly. So to see what services that are available for you, if you click on the link for students from the home page, you'll see a list of services. At the next screen, you'll see a link on the left-hand side to services by client group for off-campus students. So that will describe services for you. Now, of particular, note the availability of postal loans. So when you search for a book, for example, make sure you sign in, and then that will give you the option to request that a book be sent to you. You choose the off-campus option. So just make sure you're aware of that service, and that while the postage is covered for its dispatch to you, you need to pay for the postage back. You can also request via the document delivery service electronic delivery of journal articles and book chapters. So there's a request form that you can use, which you can access from that page, and you simply fill in the form. That gets sent electronically to the document delivery team here at Clayton, and they will send you an email with a link. It could take 3 days or 3 weeks. Generally, you need to pre-plan, make sure you know what you need early so you can get the material. So that's 4 items that we hold within the Monash Library, and as an off-campus student, you can get those copies sent to you electronically, but also for what we don't hold. So if you click on a link from a database to get to the Monash subscription for that journal, you'll see these yellow buttons that say check for full text scattered throughout, well, strategically placed, not really scattered, in our databases. And that will link you to our subscription. So if you find we don't have something and we can't own everything, then you can request it via document delivery. You're welcome to contact Tomas, myself, with any queries. Our contact details are here on the slide. Tomas works part-time Monday to Wednesday generally. I work full-time. Again, we're both based at Clayton in the Hargrave Andrew Library, but we do visit the Alfred and we can see you. Also, it would be great if you have any queries to post them on the Moodle site for this research and writing skills course, because others may also have the same question, and then everyone can benefit from the answer. So Tomas is a learning skills advisor, and I'm a librarian, and we have complementary skill sets to provide you with a holistic service in terms of research and writing skills development. We are aware that many of you haven't studied for some time at university, and this is a transition, and there are resources and services and tools that you may not have used before. And we are making available to you opportunities to become familiar with these resources and tools, such as EndNote. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions. We're here to help. The Language and Learning Online website is a really good source of advice, guidelines about, just as those tabs say, reading, writing, speaking, listening, study skills, grammar, and there's a series of quick refs that guide you through specific processes or tasks. So again, this has really useful information which you can access at any time. The website is actually being reviewed. It's been around for some time, and it has a very high standing in the learning skills community internationally. So make sure you check it out. To highlight the library guides we have that will introduce you to Moodle and Turnitin. So they're two critical tools that you will be using over the course of your studies. So please make good use of these guides to aid you in becoming more familiar with these tools. So we've come to the end of our presentation. As Thomas and I have said earlier, your questions are always welcome. Please feel free to post them via the Moodle forum or email us directly. And thank you for your attention, and remember to look after yourselves during this course of study, and we're here to help. Thank you and goodbye.